So my talk basically begins with questions. So the big question is, what makes a thing sacred? How do we define that? Can we create sacred architecture, or can we only create an architecture of the sacred? Two different things. What is the role of the architect in the creation of such places? Do young architects and architecture students have a burning desire to enter this field? Is there room for a spiritual dimension in architecture that is not for religious purposes? How might we approach such an idea? Today, sacred art and architecture are battlefields. Where a century ago, the debate for such noted church architects as Ralph Adams Cramp or Bertram Goodhue, whose design for St. Stephen's Church in Cohasset, Massachusetts, we see here, might have turned on the most appropriate stylistic response for a church. The question today is, do we need a building at all to be religious? This is a picture of Pastor Keith Anderson, who is a Lutheran minister in Dublin, Pennsylvania. And he meets his members of his congregation in a tavern for God on Tap. People of all ages are turning away from organized religion, especially young people, that we demographically define as millennials. Those are folks that are born between 1982 and 1994, and Gen Zers, which were born between 1995 and 2010. But these young people are not choosing to be atheists. Rather, they are looking for a more genuine, personal experience of the spiritual in their lives. They are suspicious of the institutional power of all religions and the corruption that is bound to come with such worldly influence. According to surveys by the General Social Survey, the Trinity College American Religious Identification Survey, and the Pew Research Center, the percent of adults surveyed who said that they are not affiliated with any organized religion or are agnostic or atheist, or describe their religious affiliation as none, N-O-N-E, has steadily grown. This is the second largest group in these surveys, larger than any single denomination or sect of believers, except for Roman Catholics. The largest demographic group of nones is found in college-aged people. Obviously, the landscape of faith is changing, and how are designers of sacred space supposed to respond to that? How do we educate future architects who are among the very people who are changing their attitudes about religion the fastest? Indeed, what is the role of architecture in making a place sacred? Religion scholar Diana Eck notes that architecture functions as a frame to help us experience, on a personal level, the sacred, not to create the sacred itself. Architecture is often the lens through which we are able to orient ourselves to the grandeur of the sacred, the numinous, to use the theologian Ralph Otto's word for it. Eck explains that, quote, "It is through the windows that we are able to see in ways our unfettered gaze cannot comprehend. Architects do not, in that sense, construct the sacred, but they do enable us to see it. And in that sense, architecture is a revelatory art. It is training the eye to see and training the soul to deep seeing." Unquote. Architecture can serve as a vessel to convey a sense of the sacred, but it is not sacred itself. I think it's important here to distinguish between what religious architecture historian Jean Holgren-Kildee articulates as situational versus substantive sacred space. Substantive sacred space is that in which a divine presence is believed to reside, and which in turn makes the space sacred. Perhaps a place like this highly decorated church on Easter Sunday. Mircea Eliade the noted historian of religion, describes it as a place that connects heaven, earth, and the underworld, with an axis mundi extending vertically through all these realms, separating the sacred from the profane. This view posits sacredness inherent in the very objects used in worship, including buildings, which we call sacred architecture. But another perspective describes the sacred as situational. Any place can be sacred depending on the presence, location, and actions of human beings, often acting in community, such as this tent revival meeting from the 1930s. It is this kind of sacred space that seems to be described by Christ himself, who, according to Scripture, said, quote, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them." This verse from Matthew describes a relational aspect of the sacred among people in community. This means that virtually any place can be sacred or holy, depending on the situation. Nearly all religions locate the creation of the sacred in the actions of people drawn to celebrate a shared belief. The philosopher Carsten Harries describes the sacred as the function of people gathered to remember. Quote, "Architecture is properly sacred," Harries suggests, "only as a site of sacred memory." Harries believes that such sacred memory helps to define identity, it is communal, and it expresses a concern for the future, what we might also describe as an afterlife. Harry's description suggests that sacred architecture needs to fulfill a certain function, provide a space for human action to transpire, through which sacredness might be achieved. In this case, the careful attention to how the built environment accommodates ritual, or the function as a place of prayer, meditation, or solace, as the highest calling in architecture's service to the sacred. I had an opportunity to explore these issues a few years ago while serving as a visiting professor for a graduate architecture design studio at the Catholic University School of Architecture and Planning in Washington, D.C., which has a sacred space and cultural studies concentration. A nearly semester-long studio design project provided a way to enter into a dialogue with students about their own spirituality and, in light of their own belief systems, how they define or are defining the sacred. We were also curious about how the students' definitions of contemporary sacred space compared with how architecture faculty, who sat on the design studio reviews, perceived the sacred and its architectural expression. The studio's dozen graduate students were invited to learn about the shifting landscape of spirituality taking place in the U.S. and abroad, and to reflect on what it means for the future of sacred space. We shared with the students statistical data on people's changing attitudes towards organized religion, how these changes are expressed in personal ideas concerning spirituality, and how these social shifts might have an effect on the creation of sacred space. We assigned a multi-month design problem focused on defining what the sacred was, and then to design a sacred place outside of the conventional notions of a religious building. The project was set within an evolving, thriving urban neighborhood in Washington. Specifically, because they were millennials, our students, we asked them to reflect upon their own experiences regarding organized religion, the contours of their own spiritual lives, and the spiritual search that they might be engaged in. Working in teams, the students made short presentations reflecting on the readings, their own beliefs, and how architecture might address new attitudes about belief by those in their own generation, and how might they explore a realm of design to give form to these new frontiers of the sacred. The presentations revealed a willingness to greatly broaden the realm of sacred space. Students found opportunities to define the sacred in such activities as in performing music, in moving their bodies through space, in the medium of dance, in digitally connecting with people and events around the globe, in sharing with and caring for other human beings by giving and receiving, in creating a safe place for women who are victims of domestic violence, in landscape and nature, serving as a setting for contemplation, reflection, and celebration, in providing support to those seeking to strengthen their bodies and spirits through nutrition and exercise. And what these presentations reveal is that we needed to be careful about how to consider the design problem we were going to assign these students. Conventional notions of sacred space and place would not work. The students' wide range of attitudes about what the sacred might be and how architecture could respond to it prompted us to make the second part of the design assignment more fluid than a list of required spaces. The new building, students were told, should reflect some of the recognition of traditional sacred spaces with a combination of places for the spirit, places to share community, places for outreach, places for creation, and places for worship. Students were given a list of optional spaces and places to consider in their designs. It was really up to them to decide how much space these program elements should occupy to successfully serve a function. Typically, in a design assignment, you give students a list of spaces they have to provide and tell them how big they need to be. We didn't do anything like that. We told them to design a program for the building that they were going to create in terms of the sacred place. Because this was not a single-use building, but instead multifaceted in its spaces and functions, it offered opportunities to build in cathedral. Now, the term in cathedral was coined by author and educator Elizabeth Drescher, a concept of in cathedral, as she explains in her foreword to Keith Anderson's book, Digital Cathedral, recognizes the sacred in everyday life, in everyday places, the network of relationships among neighbors and even strangers, and the witness of believers beyond the confines of an enclosed sacred space. The students' designs for new sacred space should be in cathedral with the surrounding neighborhood and the people who live there. Related to this fluid sense of the sacred was the notion of situational versus substantive sacred space that I defined a few minutes ago. The design assignment presented opportunities to design a situational sacred space. This assignment resulted in some provocative, challenging schemes. One design uses the garden metaphor to create sacred place for the local community, giving the neighborhood a green space. Another includes a shelter for women and homeless, those whom the students describe as spiritually underserved. A third design conceives of new sacred space as a place where you interact with people around the globe through media, such as a large screen visible from an open plaza. There are also large and small spaces where people from the neighborhood could share, learn, and celebrate with one another, and a double wailing wall where residents can take a prayer and leave a prayer through movable drawers. That's that image at the lower part of the slide. Pilgrimage as a way of discovering the sacred is the heart of a fourth design in which a labyrinth occupies much of the site and a social setting for discussion, spirituality, and philosophy. A fifth design that features spiral ramps illuminated by natural light from above takes as its theme giving and receiving, which the students note are at the very core of human love. One ramp culminates in a view towards Washington National Cathedral, and the other ramp terminates on the roof with views towards the east. At night, a rotunda offers views of stars and moonlight. At the end of the design studio, we studio critics concluded that the changing nature of sacred space at this moment in history is a question without ready answers and no clear path to solutions. This became apparent, especially during some of the formal design reviews, where the question of what could be or should be considered sacred space and architecture's role in defining what that is was debated by reviewers and students alike. The faculty reviewers had a more traditional sense of the sacred, that it was more substantive, while the students presented schemes that seemed much more situational in their sacredness. Most of the designs focused on creating sacred space where people could explore relationships and build community. By confronting, challenging, and broadening the idea of sacred space and place, the design studio demonstrated that the definition of sacred space and place is not static and is never unchanging. The student designs were products of a time when the very idea of sacred space and place is open to speculation and invention. Every generation needs to ask and try to answer what this is. The results might be architecture, sacred as well as secular, that is more expressive of and responsive to the full range of human experience. Thank you.